Well, Genesis chapter 42, we will be considering verses 25 through the end of the chapter, 25 through 38. The title of the message is The Inescapable Crucible. The Inescapable Crucible. Genesis 42, 25 through 38. Why don't we pray and seek God's help? Heavenly Father, we've come today, and there are an assorted collection of needs among us. We've talked about them as we've been gathering, things that are happening, things that have happened with which we're still thinking about and processing and trying to understand how we can best minister the love of Christ and the truth of the gospel in the lives of others. And we pray for help. We ask for strength and wisdom and love and resolve and a zeal for your name and a willingness to do the hard thing. I pray that you'd help us today as we've gathered to listen to your word, to be taught, encouraged, instructed, that we might take hope from the things we read today and what we learn, what we know of this rest of the story. I pray your word would be made clear and plain to everyone who's here, everyone who listens. In Christ's name, amen. Well, I'd like to pick up and just read, to begin with, verse 25 through to the end, and then make some review and introductory statements. So beginning in verse 25, "And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to replace every man's money in his sack and to give them provisions for the journey. This was done for them. Then they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed. And as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money in the mouth of his sack. He said to his brothers, 'My money has been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack.' At this their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, 'What is this that God has done to us?' When they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, 'The man, the Lord of the land, spoke roughly to us and took us to be spies of the land. But we said to him, "We are honest men. We have never been spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan." Then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, "By this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men, and I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land." As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." Then Reuben said to his father, "Kill my 2 sons, if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." Okay. All right, so the title of the message today was the Inescapable Crucible. And to set the stage for that and remind us of what's happening here, let's just remember what a crucible is, right? It's a container of sorts, right, that can withstand high heats. And you put metals or minerals, ore into it, and you put it into a furnace, and it holds that, and then it's so hot in there it literally melts the rock inside, and it separates into its various parts. So it will, if you're wondering how pure this ore is, you could put the ore into a crucible, into a furnace, let it heat up for a while, take it out, and you can look and examine what's left. You can screed off what you don't want, the slack, and then leave what's there as pure as that may be. So on the one hand, the crucible is for finding out what something's made of. And then the other hand, the crucible also fulfills the role of purifying something. You put it in there and to separate it out from its impure parts and to have left just what's pure. And so when we talk about this idea of an inescapable crucible, Joseph's brothers are in a crucible that they cannot escape from. They've left Egypt, but the crucible, they didn't know it, but they were traveling in a crucible along the way. They didn't realize it. And so they were before Joseph in a crucible as he was testing them to see what manner of men they'd become. But before they leave, he arranges some things so that even when they're absent from him, they are still in a crucible, and it doesn't go away. And they spend the whole time under immense heat and pressure and tension as these men have to wrestle and deal with the things that are happening to them. So this is where we are. As when they were before Joseph and he had designed these tests, he was putting them through their paces and he was observing them and making certain judgments about them and what sort of men they were. But he's no longer there to observe them, but that does not mean they're not still in a crucible. They are. They very much are. He designed, I think, 7 tests, more or less, for them. We have already seen 4 of those tests, and I want to review those briefly and then pick up and kind of summarize the material we're going to see today. So the first test was whether Benjamin was still alive, right? And it appears to Joseph, by watching his brothers and by the way they've talked, that he is still alive. They passed that first test. The second test was whether someone would volunteer to leave the others in Egypt and go retrieve Benjamin from Canaan. Right? Initially, it was going to be they were put in prison, and the idea was they were there for 3 days. They didn't know how long it was going to be, but he threw them in prison, and they knew that they had to come to a consensus that which brother would be set free to go back to Canaan and to retrieve Benjamin. And there were no takers. No one could convince the others to let them go while they stayed, and no one was nominating any of their brothers due to their virtuous character to go and faithfully come back for them. There was that level of lack of trust, but also exactly who is it would you send to convince Jacob to let Benjamin come? It's just not very likely that Jacob is going to let go. If he already lost Joseph, then he's going to lose all of his sons, all of other sons, except for he's got Benjamin, and only one returned from Egypt, and he's saying, hey, let me have him, and it's not going to be good. And so, no takers. The brothers failed the test. Third test was whether Joseph came to them, brought them out of prison after 3 days, and changed the deal. Would one of you volunteer to stay behind in an Egyptian prison, trusting his brothers to go back and retrieve Benjamin in order to free you from prison? And Joseph said he was doing this because he feared God and he knew that their families were in the famine, and so he didn't want to just leave their families. And so he said, I fear God. You're going to be able to take your provisions back for your families, but somebody's got to stay here. And the brothers all agreed this was a better plan. At least they all didn't have to stay in the prison. And so they agreed to that plan, but then who would remain? No volunteers willing to sacrifice themselves. No one's that selfless. No one also was confident enough in the word of their brothers that they would come to get them. So they failed the test. So Joseph did something more. He took one of them from their midst. He took Simeon. He laid hands upon him, or had hands laid on him. And they chained him. Chained Simeon up right in front of his brothers so that his brothers would see that and remember it when they left. When that happened, the brothers were moved. They acknowledged their guilt to one another. They were talking about their sins amongst themselves before they left. All this sort of thing was going on. Right? What a thing. Right? He says to them that you're going to have to pick one brother, not the others. And they say to each other, truly we are guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us and did not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. Right? All of this happens. He leaves, he comes back, and he says, all right. And he grabs Simeon and chains him up. And this is an amazing thing. So, because Joseph's not at all confident that his brothers will come back, he makes sure Simeon is chained up before their eyes. Hopeful that God will use that crucible of that memory of their brother, and even of Joseph from many years before, to work repentance and change in their lives. And this is his hope. This is why he has Simeon bound. So he ensures that the last thing they see before they leave Egypt is their brother in chains. And then they leave and Simeon leaves. Joseph, I will say this, is desperate to burn this image into their newly softened consciences. For the first time, he's heard them kind of talking amongst themselves, we shouldn't have done this. God is judging us for the evil thing we did to our brother, Joseph. And so their conscience seems a little bit softer. So maybe this new image will be powerful in their minds. Remind them of their misdeeds. Will serve as a barrier in their conscience so they don't cross over it and transgress it and treat Simeon the same way they treated Joseph and just say, well, he's lost. It doesn't matter. We got what we needed out of it. We're fine. Keep them from abandoning Simeon. They have begun to pass this test in terms of their feelings and their sentiments. They seem to be truly remorseful for some of the things that have happened. They truly don't seem to want to lose Simeon. They were certainly eager to get rid of Joseph. So it's a very different reaction here. But in order for them to really pass this test, they're going to have to come back for him later. So it made a good start here with this third test. Fourth test. Before they left, Joseph further prepared the crucible, stoked the fires to keep really, really hot and to keep getting hotter the whole time they were gone. This is what we'll be considering today. They couldn't escape this crucible. Joseph issued a command in verse 25 that would spark a whole series of discussions among his family when they got back to Canaan. He ordered that the money they were supposed to pay for all the grain that they got would be snuck back without their knowledge into their bags to be unpacked later and discovered. And oh, how the accusations and the sparks would fly when this happens. You'd imagine. I mean, if you were innocent of something, but all the evidence was right there for people to see that you were guilty of something that you hadn't done, but what you had done in the past. This is it's a hard situation. This is what's happening. This is what Joseph puts them into. This was the next test. This was the fifth test. So we've gone through the first four. This was the fifth test. It would make it appear that they had somehow bartered their brother away in order to obtain the grain, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be the assumption? And that would mean that this crucible, which was made to test their mettle and to see what sort of men they were and what sort of men they would be in response to the fires of this crucible, the crucible wasn't just in Egypt, but was with them as they traveled home and ready to pounce upon them once they arrived and unpacked. In addition to that, it was no longer Joseph who was watching them. Before, Joseph was the one observing what sort of men they were. Now he's going to find out how it all turns out, but in the meantime, while in Canaan and while on their way, the men are in the crucible together, observing themselves, witnessing one another quiver and bemoan their misfortune, watching as things continued to heat up and the heart of each man was laid bare, facing their sins. They were all equally guilty and all watching one another deal with this. This in itself is a tremendously taxing trial on their conscience. Think about this. When brother meets brother in the camp or in the field, one of them has finally been able to just have a few moments where he's not thinking about this anymore. And he's walking by, maybe the sun's shining, and he's just enjoying the day, and he happens upon a shade tree. He comes up to it, and there his other brother is weeping, tears wet over what they've done and how guilty they are, and what are they going to do now? And the incongruity of their emotions at the time slays them both. The one who's all carefree is feeling, how dare I feel this way? Have I forgotten what I've done? And the one who's all weepy looks at the one who's carefree and says, how could you? Don't you care? And they become for themselves their own grinding wheel in a sense. I mean, it's hard. They're rubbing against each other in these ways. The carefree brother immediately feels a sting in his conscience, wondering how he could be so careless and happy with himself. And the brother bearing his guilt is astounded that the carefree brother can have even a moment to smile. How much of this can they withstand? For how long? It seems to me that this is part of the design of Joseph. Part of prepping this crucible to remain white hot is this expectation. That was the fifth test. How would they respond? They seem to have done okay at this test, though it's hard to say with such limited material. They seem to have kind of become a unit over time. But in terms of further tests, which were designed by Joseph, there are probably two. And as I mentioned, Joseph is no longer the one watching his brothers, but rather they're watching themselves. But there are two others who are also witnessing them. Number one, Jacob, and number two, Benjamin. In order to bring Benjamin to Egypt, you're likely going to have to win over both the trust of Jacob and the trust of Benjamin if he's going to come with you. First, would the brothers be able to win the trust of Jacob to send Benjamin? If so, then they would quickly return to him, right? They would quickly return to Joseph. Of course, they don't win Jacob's trust, and he refuses outright to send Benjamin. The brothers fail the test, and down in Egypt, Joseph would learn that they failed the test with more and more certainty with each passing week. Second, would they earn the trust of Benjamin? Would he be confident? Think of this. Would he be confident? Would Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, be confident that his brothers would not just trade him for Simeon and leave him in Egypt? I mean, Simeon's their brother. He's just kind of their half-brother. Or would he be confident that they'd not just sold Simeon and now wish to do the same to him? I mean, we don't know the family dynamics here. Maybe Simeon was kind of the one that everybody was kind of sick of. Maybe Joseph knew that growing up, and so he chose Simeon because he was the next in line as far as the one least liked among the brothers. Would they come back for Simeon? I don't know why he chose Simeon. Or we could ask, would Benjamin believe them at all in their story? Would the bonds of love among the brothers from various mothers be too weak to move Benjamin to action? Maybe he believes them. Okay, I see what you're saying is true, but I don't really care if Simeon's down there. That's your problem. Maybe. Would Benjamin refuse the idea of risking his life to free his brother from prison? Well, the brothers fail here too. They don't earn his trust. And Joseph would learn that also with certainty as the weeks piled up into months. Well, despite failing so miserably, in time and slowly, in the crucible, these brothers are slowly transformed into different sorts of men. More on that in the weeks ahead. So the crucible then is inescapable in two ways. First of all, maybe in three ways, but first of all, leaving Egypt did not make it easier. Instead, Joseph had designed that it would be increasingly difficult to maintain any appearance of innocence before others, and that these tests would remind them of what they did to him. Notice it was pieces of silver. It was money that he put in their bags. They'd come back with silver and without a brother and with silver before. Second, It's inescapable because they were witnessing the revealing work of the crucible upon one another. And so they acted as judges of one another. They were experiencing this trial and this pressure while living in a fishbowl with their equally guilty family members. It just never ended. Third, there were two other watchful eyes upon them, watching them, judging them, weighing their words and their actions, both Jacob and Benjamin. So they couldn't get away from it. All of this was masterfully planned by Joseph, and over time it yielded the necessary results. Now, just as a quick aside, before we jump into the material for today, I do want to say this. Just think about this application here. Joseph designed this crucible, and it worked. Joseph was a planner. He was diligent and faithful and careful in what he did, and all the things that he did. But here, in designing this crucible, he laid plans. He knew the family situation back home, roughly, and he laid plans and sprung a trap on his brothers such that they remained in this crucible for the whole time, as he wanted. The application is this. If a man like Joseph can conceive of the sorts of tests and the sorts of trials that are likely to result in the changes in his family that he wants to see, how much more is God, right, capable of working these changes in people? He has the advantage over Joseph of perfect knowledge, not just memories. He has the power of his spirit, not just the authority of Egypt. And he has the resolve of one who has already sacrificed everything for his people. Right? God is able to do this. While things were no means comfortable in the crucible that Joseph designed, they are likewise not comfortable in the crucible that God designs. But even more certainly than Joseph succeeded, God himself will succeed and will reveal what is within us and purify us in the process, right? This is what God does. So all of this then by way of review and introduction, and we'll dive into the material today now. So let's look at this first test, test 5, verses 25 through 28. How will the men respond to the money? And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to replace every man's money in his sack and to give them provisions for the journey. This was done for them. So all the bags are packed up and extra things are given to them for them. They are not part of that. Then they loaded their donkeys with their grain, that is, the brothers did, loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed. And as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money in the mouth of his sack. He said to his brothers, "My money has been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack." And at this their hearts failed them. And they turned, trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" Now think of this now. As the men saw Joseph's orders being carried out, they obviously did not notice their money being put back into their sacks. This was done secretly. But they could not have missed the fact that they were given both the grain that they purchased and extra provisions for the journey. This must have seemed a bit unusual to them. Perhaps they thought of it as the Egyptian ruler, who they didn't know who he was, the Egyptian ruler's way of, the Lord of the land as they call it, his way of ensuring that they have every opportunity to return and fetch their brother Simeon. Right? They've been given provisions even for the journey. This guy, he's given us every benefit of the doubt. If you're honest men, here's provisions for your journey. You can go, come back, bring your brother. And if it is as you say it is, then he'll be released to you. I think that is likely what they thought. In putting the money in their sacks, however, Joseph ensured that the brothers had enough money, for sure, perhaps even enough to send someone else to travel down to get grain when they needed it next, instead of coming themselves. It makes abandoning Simeon a little bit easier, in one sense, because they've got the cash. If they all decide they've got the money, next time they need to go get grain, they just hire somebody else to go down there and do it maybe. They don't have to personally appear perhaps before Joseph. But also, when he puts the money back, it makes the brothers deal with their guilt. They have lost a brother, but they've gained silver. Right, Judah? I mean, we got look at all the silver we've got. This is not the first time that's happened. this would not have been lost on them when they open up and they see that they've lost a brother, but they've got money. More than that, by putting the money in their sacks, the men would know that the Egyptians, who kept careful records of these sorts of things, would have known the money was missing. Think of this. They probably traveled the rest of the way home looking over their shoulders to see if there was any Egyptian soldiers coming after them. Right? I mean, you've taken all this money and somehow there's a mix-up and the money you're supposed to pay, they're short and you got out of town somehow. They're coming, probably. Right? This isn't good. So think of just that, of the second half of your journey or so, continually thinking someone might be coming after you. Right? It's bad enough, like you drive by a cop and you look down and you realize, ooh, I was going a little bit too fast. You're like, oh man. Right? Don't, stay put, right? This sort of thing. Like that's when, that's just a police officer and a small little thing like a speeding ticket. We're talking about Egyptian soldiers who are coming because you've robbed them. Right? This would be frightening. This is how the rest of that journey proceeds for them. Finally, as we see, the brothers discover the money in one of the sacks, and they are overwhelmed. Evidently, they have not been thinking about much of anything except what they had previously done to Joseph and how awful it was of them. Right? They were there in front of Joseph, and they said to one another, this is happening to us. The reason this man thinks we're spies and is accusing us and wanting one of our brothers, it's because what we did to Joseph. Remember the look in his eyes, remember his pleadings. We shouldn't have done this. And evidently they've left now. They've been going on their way. They discover the money, and they all say in agreement to one another, and with fear and trembling, what do they say? What is this that God has done to us? Right? They see it as God's divine judgment upon them. They feel the weight of a guilty conscience before God, and they have felt that ever since they left Egypt. More than that, they now realize, think of this, just how unlikely it is they can ever convince the Egyptian ruler they're honest men now. That was their thing. We're not spies, we're honest men. Honest thieves now, the evidence shows. This is frightening. You're going to have to go back there and say, well, we got this money, and do we confess that we took the money? Or that we have it? Or there was a mix-up, will they believe us? Or do we just try to hide it and pretend it didn't happen? What do we do? There undoubtedly be known thieves in Egypt. How do they show their face again? Moreover, so certain are they that none of them did this. They don't think any of them did this. They don't accuse the brother. They see it as a direct act of God to upend their plans and provide no escape of their deserved judgment for what they had done to Joseph so many years earlier. Right? They don't say, what? Something must have happened. How did that happen? They say, God is against us. Like we give these men our money, they give us our sacks, and unexplainably the money is in this one of our sacks. God is did God just put money there? How did God get it back? There's no explanation. They're terrified. Now, we know they didn't blame each other because we don't have anybody's name. It doesn't even tell us what brother. One of the brothers. Somebody was there, opened the sack, and found it. And it doesn't bother to tell us who, because that's not important. They didn't blame each other here. It's amazing. Really, really remarkable. So, here they are. It says their hearts failed them. Their hearts literally went out. They were utterly bewildered and amazed at the lengths to which it appeared God was going to condemn them. It'd be a terrifying feeling, wouldn't it? Like being hunted. Right? You've done everything. You get down there and this guy's accusing you of all these things. He throws you in prison for something you've never done. He starts saying, well, if you're not liars, then somebody's got to stay here in prison. You got to go fetch the other brother. You leave and now the money's there. You're going to be accused of stealing. You can't do anything. God is guaranteed you are going to be judged. This is not going to go well for you. It's time to face the music. Just imagine the scene as they speak with one another, trembling, right? God is after us. Right? This is what they say. It's incredible. Their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" They're utterly slain by a guilty conscience. So in that sense, they pass. They felt their guilt. How did they respond to the discovery of the money? They felt their guilt, and they did not blame whoever it was that found the money. They didn't respond with "you." They just all collectively said, "What have we done? God is after us." But they failed. They passed in that sense, but they failed. They did not return the money, although we could say perhaps they were too far along on their journey now to go back. That's possible. But also, they tried to hide this fact of the money from their father when they get to Canaan. No mention is made of, when they tell about what happened, they don't say, "And also, get this, we've got extra money." Of course, they can't hardly say that, because how would that look? So we got all the grain, and we don't have Simeon, but we do have some of the money back. It's like, why did you sell him? Right? So they hide this, they cover it up. They don't mention this at all later when it comes up. So now, test 6. Do the brothers have their father's trust? Beginning in verse 29, all the way down to the end of the chapter. When they came to Jacob, their father... actually, before I start reading this section we need to break up some. This test, I think, works itself out in the midst of several factors, all of which, several stages, all of which crank up the heat of the crucible. Moses reports these factors to us in pairs. First, in each pair there's some revelation or suggestion by the brothers, and then that is followed by Jacob's response. So these pairs are as follows. First, there is the news of the events in Egypt and their leaving Simeon behind. That is followed initially by Jacob's silence. But that silence doesn't last long. Think about this in verse 29. When they came to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, then you have that report, and it stops at the end of verse 34. There's no response that we're told of from Jacob. And then now the next thing begins. As they emptied their sacks, behold, and these things happen, and then Jacob responds. And then verse 37, Reuben says to his father, he makes a suggestion, and then verse 38, but he said, my son shall not go down. So there's these pairs, and we're going to consider it in that way. So the second of the pairing was the revelation made in the middle of the camp with Jacob around to see it, that the brothers all still possessed their money with which they were supposed to use for grain. That is followed by Jacob accusing them of bereaving him not only of Simeon but also of Joseph. And the third pair, we read about Reuben's foolish and rash offer to substitute his 2 children for the life of Benjamin if he should not return. That is followed by Jacob's refusal and his absolute rejection of any plan that involved Benjamin. So let's look at these 3 parts. Part 1, news of the events in Egypt, verses 29 through 34. When they came to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man, the Lord of the land, fitting it is that they speak of Joseph that way after those dreams. The man, the Lord of the land, what did he do? He spoke roughly to us and took us to be spies of the land. But we said to him, we are honest men. We have never been spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of our father. One is no more, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. Then the man, the Lord of the land, said to us, by this I shall know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, and take grain for the famine of your households, and go your way. Bring your youngest brother to me, then I shall know that you are not spies, but honest men, and I will deliver your brother to you, and you shall trade in the land. it is helpful to realize and point out, I think we typically read this and think, oh, they faithfully told him what happened. Kind of. They said he spoke roughly to us, took us to be spies. They give some of the dialogue pretty faithfully. They don't mention the bit about being thrown in prison. They don't mention the fact that, oh yeah, we've got some money that it appears that they're going to think we've stolen, and we're not going to come back on good terms. We're going to have an extra hurdle to go over. They present it like it's just going to, if we just get Benjamin, it'll be no problem. We can get Simeon back and everything's good. Maybe, if they just cover over the whole fact of the money, what is going to happen when they show up in Egypt? They're going to be accused of being thieves, dishonest men. This isn't going to go well at all. So they kind of mislead Jacob here. Now just think about being Jacob. Oh, the feelings this news must have stirred up immediately in his heart. His sons come and say, so you're not going to believe what happened to one of your sons. It's the craziest story. We went down there and this guy, he thought we were spies. So we told him we weren't, and we tried to really convince him. We told him all this information, and then he said, no, I don't believe you. And he took one of us. And if you give us Benjamin, then we can get him back. What a harsh reminder. I mean, it's bad enough to be reminded of this earlier time when the brothers return on an errand, but without one of their own. Just being reminded of that is hard enough, but to be reminded in this way is so harsh. It's like ripping the wound off, or the bandage off the wound, right? It's so bad. And then the whole situation sort of sounds halfway made up. And of course, the way it's reported to him, it is sort of halfway made up. They left out a lot of the details, the important things. It sounds like a ruse, maybe, just designed to get Benjamin away. He can't be sure exactly what's going on, but all these feelings of losing another son are everywhere. He feels it. He can't escape it. It seems to be that the whole thing might be a lie. No doubt, the shrewd Jacob, who, while he himself was no longer a schemer, he knew it takes one to know one. He's got all these sons who are, and no doubt he's watching them carefully at camp, seeing what's going on, how they respond, the looks they give one another. Are they trying to pull one over on him? What's going on? Listening to their manner around camp to see if there's more to the story or if he was lied to in some other way. You can feel the suspicion, I think, in the silence. They give this report, and Jacob is quiet. I mean, can you imagine coming to your parents to say, this is what happened, and there's just no response? They just put their head down and think for a while? That in itself says a lot, right? It says a massive amount. So, that's the first bit. You can just feel the suspicion in the silence. Part 2, the heat is turned up even more. Verses 35 and 36. As they emptied their sacks, so now they have this whole time, they've said they've come, they've told their stories, they've greeted their families and their children who are awaiting them. All this has happened, and now it's time. They're in the middle of camp, they're unloading their donkeys, they're emptying their sacks, and everything is getting spread out. This is the haul that we got. As they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me. So let's say this again. After their initial report and whatever family greetings were done, the brothers began unpacking the supplies from their journey. Can you imagine, before we look at this scene, and we've been thinking about about Jacob watching them, but think also of this. Can you imagine Simeon's wife and family? I mean, he's gone? You left him? Well, we got to send Benjamin right away. What in the world? How would they respond? Well, probably after the grain was all unpacked, the men began unpacking their personal sacks. And their attempt to cover up the money in one brother's sack was now made useless, as they all had the money in their sacks that they were supposed to use for grain, wrapped up just the way it had been. It could not have looked worse. I'll say this, it couldn't have looked any worse if they had unpacked a sales receipt for Simeon. Like, it couldn't have looked worse. You know, cost for all the food, one Hebrew slave named Simeon. Like, it wouldn't have been any worse than what it is. They've got all this money. We've got all the grain. Look at all we brought back for our families. Minus one brother. And our bags are still flush with money. How did that happen? It's terrible. And all the suspicions that Jacob had are just realized. I mean, there's the evidence right there. High price for a slave, but they seem to have pulled it off. These men are shrewd after all. Good bargainers, evidently. What in the world has happened? Here they had returned with a brother left in Egypt, every one of them not only a donkey loaded with grain, but a bag full of money. The conclusions that Jacob reached and the things that come out of his mouth must have shocked his sons. They knew it looked bad, but I mean, whether Jacob already knew how Joseph was lost to him or he had suspected it only, he now reached the firm conclusion that he pointedly accused his sons for both losses, he says. Right? And Jacob, their father, said to them, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more." He's not the kind of father, he's not in a position where he's willing to accept from them anymore, and it might have been for a long time, but at least now he's not, the idea that something happened to Joseph out while he was out there. Now his blaming them might simply be, if you had been where you said you were going to be, none of this would have happened. Could be just that. But I think it's likely more than that, because he's not unaware of all the animosity that was there, that existed there. That's why he won't even give them Benjamin. Big part of it. There's suspicions. And now, because of what's happened now, the evidence of what it looks like has happened to Simeon, he doesn't need any more evidence about what happened to Joseph. He can just say, you guys, you did it. You bereaved me of Joseph, and now you've bereaved me of Simeon, and now you have the gall to ask for Benjamin? All of this has come against me. What is the all of this? The loss of Joseph, the loss of Simeon, ravenous, murderous, heartless sons, and the desire to take Benjamin now. That's a lot to come against a father, right? To have lost two sons at the hands of your other sons, and now they want the third one? This is awful. What a family situation. The people of God, here to bless the world. What in the world? This is awful. All this has come against me. Now let's take note. He's mistaken. Right? He's right about what they did to Joseph. He's wrong about what the accusations he's making against Simeon, or against them about Simeon. Now he has no reason to conclude anything else. All the evidence points to their guilt. But he's actually wrong about that fact. He doesn't know it. The brothers know it, but they can't deny it because all the evidence is there. They can protest all they want, but no one's going to change their mind. Jacob's not going to change his mind. All the evidence is against them. And they certainly now have to feel more greatly the weight of their guilt even more now about what they did to Joseph and how they treated their father all this time. It's there. Now, third part of all this. Reuben speaks to his father. Verse 37 and 38. Then Reuben said to his father, "Kill my two sons if I don't bring him back to you. You put Benjamin in my hands, and I'll bring him back. But he said, my son shall not go down with you. For his brother is dead, and he is the only one left, right? The only son of Rachel. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. What do we say about this? Well, here's Reuben again seeking the place of honor with his father, right? He tried to outmaneuver his father for primacy in the family earlier, sleeping with his father's concubine. That didn't work. He lost his firstborn status. Then he tried to convince his brothers, hey, let's just throw him in the pit instead of kill him. And his plan was to go back later and get him and bring him back to Dad while the other boys were still out in the field and rescue him and be the son of honor. And here he is again with just an absolute nitwit idea. What an idiot. I mean, really. In seeking to get honor, he reveals just how foolish he is and how unfit he is to be trusted. Give me Benjamin, and if anything happens to him, you can kill your 2 grandsons. Well, every grandparent thinks that's a good thing, right? I mean, what is he thinking? What grandparent thinks that's a good idea? What good exactly is this going to do, right? So let's say something happens. On the way down, he takes Benjamin, and Benjamin and Reuben both don't come back. Then he's just going to go over one day and decide it's time to kill his 2 grandsons? And that somehow makes up for this and satisfies justice? Like, that is idiotic. This is Reuben's suggestion. Tell you what. And Reuben, how's foolish? I mean, I want to get Simeon so bad and return him to you and kind of get my place of honor. Like, give me Benjamin, and I'm going to gamble the life of my 2 sons. That nothing on this journey, which is dangerous anyway, we're going to take it. Everything's going to go fine. If anything happens to Benjamin, then you kill my boys. Imagine he comes back, and this time a lion a wild beast actually did come upon them and killed Benjamin. Nothing he could have done. He tried to fight it off, and he's there, and he comes back again with the torn robe. Recognize. I mean, what are we going to do here? Now we're going to kill Reuben's 2 sons? This is stupid. What is he even trying to suggest? Of course you can't trust Reuben. These are his ideas. You can't trust Reuben. How is any sense of justice satisfied for a grieving father, bereaved of his children, by killing his grandchildren? It makes 0 sense. Jacob refuses flatly and absolutely. Benjamin will not go. He says something curious here at the end. He says, if harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. He said something similar when he learned that the news came that Joseph had died. Turn there for a moment to Genesis chapter 37 and look at verse 35. Genesis 37, verse 35. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. Of course, we remember commenting on what sort of miserable comforters they would be. Half of them are the actual murderers, they think, really, and selling him. And said, but he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning. So when he thinks he's lost Joseph, they say, after a long period of grieving, they say, hey, come on, I understand you miss him, and it's awful what happened to him. But life goes on. You can't keep grieving this way. It's time to change out of those garments of mourning, right? No more ash on the head. Come on, let's get on with things. We can eat as normal. And he refuses, and he says, no, I'm never going to stop mourning him, right? I'm going to go down to Sheol to him, mourning. He didn't just say, I'm going to live the rest of my life mourning. He says, I'm going to go down to Sheol, and there I'll see him again. But until that day, I'll be mourning. Now, he says, look, if you would take Benjamin from me as well, you would bring my bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. So, with the loss of Joseph, he's saying, I'll never stop grieving until I die. With the loss of Benjamin too, he'd be so overcome with sorrow that he'd just be put into an early grave. Right? There's the difference. Right? Between a life of sorrow and then being so overcome with sorrow, you pass away. And this is what he's saying. I'll die. You'll kill me. At this point, then, Jacob himself and his grief and the fact that he does not trust his sons all stand in the way of the family being reunited in Egypt. Right? Jacob has come to these conclusions. These men are murderers, or at least he thinks they murdered Joseph and they sold Simeon, and they want Benjamin, and he will not have it, no matter what. Simeon is just lost. If Simeon is lost, Simeon is lost. He's not going to trade Benjamin for Simeon. He's not going to let anything happen to him, and it's not even certain you'll get Simeon back. He's not going to do any of that. Benjamin stays put. The family's not going to Egypt. They're done with Egypt. That's his plan. So, family's not going to be reunited in Egypt. It's not going to happen. Doesn't look like it. So, which means God is going to have to do even more yet if this is going to come about. He's going to have to make the famine. They got grain enough they think it's going to last them. That's why they went down there. The famine's going to have to get even worse so that they run out of their supplies and they got to go back. They're desperate. And God does that. So the brothers have failed this test too. They've not earned the trust of their father Jacob. And in a sense, how could they in light of the evidence? How could they? Last test, number 7. Do the brothers have the confidence of Benjamin? What does the text say? Nothing. Silence again. Obviously, we could say this, they did not find an advocate for Simeon in their brother Benjamin. There was so much about their story and the events that didn't add up. How could he possibly go with them in any confidence? Right? I mean, imagine they all come back, right? I mean, here's the scene. We don't have Simeon, but we got all the money, we got all the grain, and the guy said, Benjamin, you're next. You need to come with us now. I mean, yeah, right. I'm not going anywhere. Listen to, this isn't happening. I'm not leaving. Evidently, they have not been living with one another over these years in such a way that Benjamin felt a deep trust for his brothers, or even any strong affection for Simeon, such that he would say, well, I don't know how true it is or not, but that's my brother down there, and I'm going to go get him. Let him rot. So the brothers have failed again in this test. So much failure. It does not look like these men are going to get back to Egypt. The family's going to be reunited. The dream's going to come true. None of this looks like it's going to happen here. It's over. It's yet another part of the story where it looks like, it's done. And yet, that's not how it ultimately ends up. God makes the famine worse. It hangs on. It lasts longer than they thought. All these sorts of things. They've got to go back and get more supplies. They weren't planning on making multiple trips to Egypt. But now they're going to have to go back again. And so this is what happens. So they run out of food. God brings it to pass. We look at the details of all that in later weeks. But this is really all I want to say by way of application is you could hardly imagine a group of people more or less likely to be reunified, to be reconciled than these two. Right? Joseph and his brothers and Jacob. Those three parties, you might say. Jacob, the brothers, and Joseph. These people are going to be a happy family? That didn't seem possible. And as we keep reading through the story, certain things seem like they get us a little closer, and then they end up as unlikely as ever, it appears. It doesn't look good here, but that's not the whole story. God has more to do. And just the application is we know people by name, right? We know people who it seems, their situation seems utterly impossible to be reconciled. it doesn't seem like they're ever going to come together. It's tough. Dig in a little bit, and it gets worse the more you find out. It's just like, it becomes more bewildering. In one sense, you feel like, well, how can they not just patch this up? In another, you find out more grievances, and you think, man, how is all this stuff was going on? What are we going to do? How do you get these parties together? Well, God was able to do it. So just had to have confidence in God. I mean, to think of this, I mean, believers, like we're all, there's as Christians, we're one family, right? That's a reality. God's going to work that out. There will be reconciliation. That's a real encouragement. One way or another, these things will happen. God told Jacob that he and his children with him would enjoy these blessings. And it's going to happen. He and his children with him are going to do it. And as unlikely as it looks, as impossible as it seems, as undeserving as they are, as much heart change as they all need, he brings it about. He just does. It takes a long time for these brothers. It's taken some 22 years. Then it took this crucible that they've been put in here lately, and they're in this thing for some period of months. But it works. It works. We don't know God's timing. Those things are a mystery to us. We know His purpose. And we can have great confidence in that. Well, that's as far as we're going to get in the story today. We'll pick up in chapter 43 next time when they come back because of the severity of the famine in the land, and they come back and have to deal with Jacob or Joseph again. Jacob and Joseph. All right, any questions or comments?